work started with Kim Friedman and some other colleagues in FAO, and where Kim asked, but how do we know how many freshwater species are on Earth? And we continue elaborating on the counting of species, about methods, and if we could provide some improvements for delivering these numbers to the society. Okay, so we need to know our environment for various reasons. For the 5 values of biodiversity that I have listed there, and also about the ecosystem services that biodiversity delivers. This knowledge is important for us to describe our environment, but also to describe the changes that are constant and everywhere, and if possible to model these changes, to anticipate these changes, to adapt our activities and practices about the use of biodiversity. Well, this knowledge can be used as well to try to mitigate these impacts and the change they occur. They occur. So up to a point where sometimes we think that we can return to a previous environment state and then reverse the shifting baseline. So counting ecosystem components such as the number of species and their shifting abundance is fundamental to such management, as this creates an easy arithmetical description of our environment, a simple one that everybody more or less understands. And we do that to reach the ultimate goal of exploiting species in a sustainable way, meaning that we can harvest the same amount of biomass and as high as possible, but on a long-term basis. So it's important to know the species counts to monitor this natural change. Again, it's simple things, easily understood. And counting species, yes, represent the first simple level of biodiversity monitoring, and we have to pay attention to deliver this indices quite in an updated way and in a correct way. The problem that we have now, and we take the example for fishes, but it's true for any group of species, there are multiple sources of information, and they don't address the same domain, they don't have necessarily the same scope, and so on. And you can find as many numbers as you want to find. And often they are not the same, and sometimes they are contradictory. So, what affects the counting of species? First, what are fishes? Well, for some decades now, it is admitted that fishes are all the vertebrae minus the tetrapod, meaning lampreys, myxine, chondrichthyes, and actinopteryges. Yet, some recent book has the title Lampreys and Fishes of Greece, for example. So, what is fishes? So you have to explain what you understand by fishes when you give this number. What are species? It's an eternal problem that we don't have a very good definition of species, and depending on the species concept that you use, you can reach several numbers. But it goes further than that, because you can give the number of already described species. You can give the number of described species plus those that we know we have discovered but not yet described, and this number increases with the genetic studies. And if you go into the site of Barcode, in certain families, the number of species is much more than what we have in a catalog of fishes or FishBase. Up to, some people give an estimation of the counts, what they think is the number of species that we will discover. So again, the numbers are not the same depending on what we are talking about. And if we want to differentiate between freshwaters and salt waters, yes, you have to give a definition of what is freshwater, because there are some standards, but some standards that are different. So again, and you always have the problem of brackish waters, you don't know what to do with this thing. And I added this line, what is freshwater and marine water. Marine water, we think that always it's salt water, a certain level of salinity. But if we talk about the Baltic Sea, for instance, we have the tendency to say, well, it's marine waters, where we know that maybe 30% of this water body is fresh water. So marine has a meaning of geographic boundaries that are not necessarily linked to the salinity of the water that are within these geographic boundaries. Which fish species? Well, some people give numbers for a certain domain, not for the all species, so we have to take care. And if we want to give numbers by geographic area, you have to define which is the occurrence status of each species that you have in your count. Well, I mentioned the sampling bias because if you derive some number from the collection data, from the occurrence data like JB, FOBIS, and so on, always remember that these data sets are highly biased in terms of sampling, and you have to apply some corrections and some statistics to give some meaningful numbers. So what first drew our attention was this poster of WWF saying that there are 51% of all known species in fresh waters. And at first we reacted very basically. We said, well, if there is 51% of species in fresh water, there is 49 species that are not in fresh water. But it's not what it means, in fact. So here I counted the number of species by milieu from a catalogue of fishes. So you see that there are 960 species that are diadromous, 16,000 species that are only in fresh waters, 16,000 that are only in marine waters. And this number, if you count the freshwater species as only in freshwater, there are more freshwater species described than only marine species described. But then if you add the ones that are in brackish or that are diadromous, then there are more marine species still than freshwater. But you have to know that for the past almost 20 years, there is more species from freshwater that are described than marine water. So I think that very soon we will have more freshwater species than marine species. So obviously the count that the WWF is the count of 18,159 species over 35,955 species, which is more or less 51%. But if you make the same count for marine species, it's 52% something. And the sum is not 100%. Well, here are some numbers by FAO area, as an example of number of species by geographic area. This is for freshwater, so for the continent, the number of FAO area are from 1 to 8. Well, here you can see that in Europe and in Australia, there is a much higher number of introduced species than in other continents. The same for marine areas, and here it's the Mediterranean that is quite remarkable in terms of introduction because of the reception migrants. And also in the area 77, because there were some tries of introduction of species from other parts of the Pacific Ocean. So again, what are the occurrence status that I have used here? Well, I have counted the native species, including the endemic species that are only present in that area. But depending on if I count the introduced or not, I may reach numbers that are a little bit different. At this scale, it's very marginal, but if you make this count at country level or water basin levels, numbers might differ quite significantly. So the important thing is to keep all this database up to date, especially to monitor the changes. To monitor the changes, we need to record the history of this number, which neither Catalogue of Fish or FishBase or others do. Also, to speed up the updating, we have to use automation of data harvesting. So it's a semi-automation because it's still too complex to entirely automate the inclusion of data directly taken by some software. As we can see, there is some challenges in the monitoring because numbers can be used or misused. And each time that you have some number, you really have to ask yourself, what does it really represent? Well, I put in italic a small point that I have in mind for a long time. I think at least 2/3 of all publications on fishes can be directly entered in databases. They are not proposing new theories or refutation of new theories, they just add data, just like length frequency and so on. So for a long time, I think we should go, or we will go, toward a system where the peer review system will be included in the database, meaning that researchers will include their results in the database, and then they will be hidden until these data are validated by the peer review system, which will avoid the step of integrating data. Well, we are not there yet, and from far. Well, all systems must be updated more or less at the same time, which is not the case at the moment. And we really have to make an effort to synchronize the fish database. So I put there some of the main database, and I tried to show the interrelationship between all these databases. I will not describe the details because it's too complicated. And here I forgot Catalog of Life, I forgot FishNet. No, there are others to add. So for sure, depending on where you go and where you extract your numbers, you may slightly or significantly differ because all the systems are not updated at the same time. And sometimes the scope are slightly different and they may not register all the same thing. But from a user point of view, it's more or less the same. So we will present after this presentation an attempt to have a better collaboration in this update between Catalog of Fishes and FishBase. So conclusions, as usual, look critically to numbers and don't use them just like that. Try to understand what is behind this number. Hopefully, having more accurate data may improve biodiversity management, and also the reporting will be more explicit about this number. And for the number of species, Catalog of Fishes is definitely at the moment the most up-to-date database. So if you have to take number of species or fishes, you have to go to Catalog of Fishes. Now, if you want to have distribution by geography, it's FishBase that is the most up-to-date. For human use, you have FishBase, but you have also FAO, and I forgot Sea Around Us as well. So it's difficult to take all numbers from only one database. And yes, barcode, it's what I said. You know, you have many temporary or potential taxa species that are there, and if you want to use some prospective numbers for the number of species by family or genus, it's better to go there to add to the existing species. So again, species are very rough indices, yet they are simple to understand, and there is no excuse that we don't update it properly. Thank you very much.